Hello, folks. I'm Fred Harland, and this is Richard Clarke, as everybody knows. And I think we have a lot of great stories to discuss today. For the top news story, and this is an interesting one. If a robot is conscious, is it okay to turn it off? For our coronavirus story, would you take a COVID-19 vaccine? Here globally are potential acceptance rates, and some people will and some people won't. Technology. Why are political campaigns sending so many, apparently 3 billion texts in this election? In materials, we can tailor 2D materials to greatly improve electronic and optical devices. For our flight space story, water apparently is now known exists on the moon, say scientists. Now, why is it so important that there's water there? For environment, apparently regenerative agriculture, what you can do, and that's more important than agribusiness if we want to save our food system. In biology, what are cyanobacteria and why do they hold so much hope? And for our human story, why does motivation to learn decline with age? On health stuff, what's the link between eating dairy and meat and the risk for cancer? So that's what we'll talk about today. And so to start it all off, Richard, what's this about the ethics of turning a conscious robot off?
This is an interesting story. For most of us, our experience actually with intelligent robots is really from the Star Trek series, The Next Generation, where they had Data, this android character. And there was an episode in that in which the android crew members of the Enterprise, he was going to be dismantled for research purposes unless Captain Picard could argue that Data deserves the same rights as a human being. So the question arises, what are the basis that gives something rights? What is it about an entity that gives it some kind of moral standing? There's a philosopher, Pierre Slinger, who argues that creatures that can feel pain or suffer have a right to moral standing. In his argument, even non-human animals have moral standing. And limiting it to people is a form of speciesism, like racism or sexism. So how you answer this really depends on how you understand consciousness and intelligence. You know, the AI technology is now getting to the point where we may have to start to consider it. It's not just a movie anymore. It's starting to happen with real technology. Now, there are two kinds of intelligences they think about here. The first is domain-specific intelligence, like IBM's Deep Blue chess AI system. It got to know chess very well, this domain-specific way, and was able to beat the world's master, Garry Kasparov. There's another kind of intelligence that allows the ability to do a variety of things well, and it's called domain general intelligence. When they look to these AI machines, they call it artificial general intelligence. AGI is the term for machines that have domain general intelligence. And so far, no machine has demonstrated this kind of intelligence. And if you look at the famous Turing test to determine if something is intelligence, it is, can a person conversing with the hidden AI tell whether the AI is a human being? If it can't, then for practical purposes, Turing would say it is intelligent. But the test says nothing about whether the AI might be conscious. So this is one of the places where the issue becomes. And there are two kinds of consciousness. There's one part that is the sensory part of consciousness. You know, I feel pain, for example, or I see you, or I touch something. This is called phenomenal consciousness. And there's another part of consciousness which they call access consciousness, and it's the ability to report and reason and behave based on goals, etc. And then, so back to data, the Android data demonstrates that he's self-aware. He can tell if he's charged right or if he's got damage to his arm. Data is also intelligent in the general sense. He can play poker and he can talk about issues and fight with enemies and do physical labor. And so he has access consciousness, and he would clearly pass the Turing test, but data most likely lacks phenomenal consciousness. So he's not able to feel pain, like the philosopher said before, but maybe he can still suffer. And so does that mean that data deserves to be protected and seen as having basically human rights? In the TV show, they did not dismantle data because, like they do in Star Trek, they they said that human judges cannot agree on the significance of consciousness for moral standing. So they didn't disassemble data. But what would you do? And now, again, the question is, how are we now going to answer the question of moral standing for these non-biological creatures? And the big intelligences that we have to deal with in the future. The AI might be kind like Data or set on destruction like we saw in the Terminator movies. But do they have moral standing? Can we turn Data off?
Any comments?
Well, I think a machine is a machine. Typically artificial intelligence is not exactly the cheapest thing on the block. So if it's still useful, there's no point in turning it off. If it becomes no longer useful, then you might as well use the parts.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I see.
Okay. So you don't care if the machine is going to suffer when you turn it off?
It has no feelings because it's a machine, unless it's
Right.
programmed.
Well,
I
I've heard people describe humans as a biological machine.
And that's true. Our president is a living example.
And and people object when you turn humans off.
Well, we have feelings though.
Uh-huh.
We have feelings.
So because you have this phenomenal consciousness, then we don't turn you off. But if Data can suffer because he can't do what is important to him, you can still turn him off.
Right.
We can have pain, but we're going to allow for pain, but not suffering.
I don't believe they feel anything.
Well, you sound like it.
I suspect most people would say that they don't feel pain, and they're not really aware. But I suppose the issue is this going to develop? Through artificial intelligence, might we create robots who could feel pain or could be aware of themselves? And if we created that, then the ethics becomes real. Well, is it a problem in turning off people who are robots that can feel and are aware of themselves? That would give me pause.
The thing is that those feelings would have to be built in purposely. It's not an automatic thing.
Yeah.
And so, so if you build this in, then you have to live with the consequences, I guess.
Like I have some ethical issues with my dog, who he doesn't have certain kinds of things that I think we have, but I would have problems if I caused him to suffer.
Now he can feel that. He's alive.
Yeah, but if these robots, in some sense, can suffer, then in a sense they have become alive. Is that right?
Well, what makes you think they can feel anything?
Well, they can't right now, but that's one of the things that I think artificial intelligence is looking at. Will they be able to create robots at some point that would have that capability?
If we were to build robots that have feelings like a human being, we're playing God, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they might turn us off.
That's always been the fear.
What, Richard?
That's been the fear for a long time. That's why the Terminator movies were so big.
Oh.
Anyone else? Okay, then moving on to coronavirus. And the question is, would you take a vaccine? Because apparently in different countries, there are different senses of whether people would accept it. Richard, tell us about the story.
It's interesting the kind of studies they do here, and this was based on a recent study. It was June 2020, so it is current information. And what they found, they talked to more than 13,000 people in 19 different countries, and they found of these that a little more than 70% reported that they would be very or somewhat likely to take the vaccine, and a little more than 60% reported that they would accept their employer's recommendations to do this. But when you start to drill down in the numbers, then you see that there are differences. One of the things is by country. They saw almost 90% in China said that they would take the vaccine, and less than 55% in Russia said they would take the vaccine. So in general, people from who had a higher level of trust in their government sources were more likely to accept the routine, the vaccine. Now, there's a concern about vaccine hesitancy, and vaccine hesitancy is growing worldwide. And in many countries, vaccine hesitancy is seen as a big issue in multiple cases. It turns out the study also said people earning more than $32 a day were about twice as likely to say that they would take the vaccine as opposed to people earning less than $2 a day. Also, higher levels of education gave higher levels of acceptance. And those people who said they trusted their government more were more likely to take a vaccine. It's interesting, though, in terms of some of the age differences, is older people were more positive about taking the vaccine. Younger people were less positive about taking the vaccine unless it was recommended by their employer, in which case the younger people are going to take it. And the problem is, even with all of this, according to many doctors, to be able to get the kind of herd immunity that you want, of the 19 countries that did it, most of them would not meet the standards for this kind of herd immunity that you want to have from a vaccine program. So vaccine acceptance is a problem, and it may be one of the things that makes this pandemic go on longer.
Any thoughts?
I would think that the medical profession would have to take an active role. I know if you have a doctor that you've seen for a long time and trust, and he would say he would take it himself, then I think I might be persuaded to take it also.
So trust is an issue.
Yeah.
Mexico, I read, has imported vaccine for 90% of the people from Russia. But if the Russian people don't, only 55% of the Russian people don't trust their government, then I would kind of hesitate to do it myself if we have their vaccine. I'd
But
like
it
to know
depends
why
for
they
me.
don't want to take it.
Like you say, for me, it depends on what the vaccine is and the vaccine source. And I trust the Russian ones less than I trust some of the other ones, because the Russian ones has not had the extensive testing.
Yes, and I wonder why Mexico is in such a hurry to buy it from the Russians.
It may be the Russians are in a hurry to sell it.
Yeah, they probably got a good deal or something.
Well, also the Russians having a country like Mexico buy their vaccine, that validates what the Russians are doing.
I think the idea, trust has a lot to do with it, but I think also, there's a few things. Number one, is it going to be a brand new product that we're working with, or are these like medications that have been used in the past?
Most of the vaccines are new.
They are new? Okay, so
yeah.
I know there was something that they were looking at that might have been used with like MS or something. But I go back to when the flu shot first came out. My background is rehabilitation, and I remember the patients coming into the center who have had the flu shot and were getting Guillain-Barré. And just
Wow.
overnight, all of a sudden, they were paralyzed. So that still goes on in my mind.
Yes.
I'm like, you know, I would,
appropriately, I would say.
yeah. The other thing is, I think, depending on whether President Trump or whether President Biden are suggesting it, that would have a lot to do.
I think my wife locked herself out. I have to go let her in the house. Excuse me.
Okay. But I think the whole idea of trust and looking at the medication, but I don't think I'd be one of the first ones to get it. I don't think I'd be that brave.
I agree.
Yeah.
I would have to see how many people drop dead. If nobody does, then maybe.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Any comments? So if we move along in technology, why are political campaigns sending out so many texts? Apparently 3 billion of them in this election. Richard?
Now, this is a part of the issue with technology is we are able to communicate now with people in these different ways. And text messaging was not much used in the last presidential election, but it's apparently a big thing in this election. I wouldn't know because I am an infrequent cell phone user and don't communicate by text. I know when I call my own kids, they say, "Dad, you don't understand how people communicate now," meaning that you text instead of talking on the phone.
Mm.
And anyway, right now they say voters in the US by today will have received almost 3 billion political test messages, and the USA has 234 million eligible voters, so that's more than 10 text messages per voter. And the reason why it is so big this time is mainly because there's a new class of tools that allow for more personalized texting. And so when you get the political text, it is more personalized and it seems like it's from somebody who knows you. And it turns out the readership on these text messages is more than 90%. And the readership on email messages and phone messages and phone calls is much lower than this 90%. So they're more effective in reaching through. And then, you know, campaigns now, like I had talked about before, they are building their own database and directing their own targeting. That gets out of the problems that they were caught at doing last time using public databases. And the campaigns like this private space because it's hard to monitor. And then the other thing that is happening is the campaigns now have developed apps that when you load the app, it asks for access to your contacts. And guess what they do with that? the Biden campaign also has their Vote Joe app, and it gives users a script that they can tweak and then use as a basis for text messaging to all their friends. So there you get the text message from somebody you do know, and people are much more open to these kind of messages, whether they are based on fact or are just some kind of spam. There was a case in the last election in 2016, or no, in a primary election in Florida in August. There was a candidate, Byron Donalds, that was running for the 19th congressional district, and all the voters in that district got messages falsely claiming that he had dropped out of the race, so don't vote for him. And so this is the kind of stuff that they're doing, and this is a new avenue. And the thing is that this is not presently regulated. There's a loophole in the Federal Election Commission, which means they don't have to disclose that it's advertising or this other stuff. Maybe the rules will change, but right now it is wide open, and these guys, of course, exploit these weaknesses in the system.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, I haven't received any messages because I have a Mexican phone. But you were talking about people who open messages more frequently than email. That's because when you don't know who your message is from until you open up your messages, and then they're right there in your face. You don't even have, you can't delete them like you do emails. So when I go on my email, I can just delete all the political stuff without opening them up. So that's the difference, and that's why messages get more attention, because that's the way they're set up.
Interesting. Anybody else?
I'm sort of glad. I don't think I've gotten any political texts, but I'm just on one text with Chico's or something like that, and I'm telling you, they are like setting up those sales just for me. The way they're talking to me, it's like, Mary Ellen, you've been waiting for this, and I'm like, and the worst part is, how do you get out of that? At least if you're getting an email down the bottom, it says you can unsubscribe. But I don't know how to get out of this. So it's like, it makes me crazy. And that's just one. That's just one. So yeah, I don't know. I'll be a lot less apt to give my cell phone out again.
Any other thoughts? Okay, moving along to materials. Apparently we can play with, tailor, do something with 2D materials, and that will greatly improve our devices, electronic and optical. Richard, what's that about?
Now, you know that I have much interest in the 2D materials, and I have interest in them because you can do things with them that you can't do with those old-fashioned 3D materials. And now we're at a stage with the 2D materials where they are really looking more deeply into them and figuring out what can you do with this stuff. And there are a couple of developments recently that show how they are improving the ability to use 2D materials in optical applications and also electronic applications by altering the 2D material in two different ways. The first one is the first way they're altering it is atomically with using different atoms, and the second way they're altering it is physically bending it or folding it, or as they're talking about here, turning it into a little tube. And by doing these things, again, they're able to improve its ability to generate light, and they're able to improve the signal strength. And one of the things they're doing is they're modifying the atomic makeup of the materials. Typically, when you have 2D materials, one common form is a 2D material on top of another 2D material separated by a thin layer, the interlayer, and the interlayer commonly has atoms of the same kind on both sides. And it turns out here they've tried on the interlayer putting atoms of one type on one side and atoms of another type on the other side. And this ends up meaning that when they're the same atoms on both sides, the charge is evenly distributed. The different atoms means the charge is unevenly distributed, and this ends up creating an electric field within the plane, and the electric field enhances light emissions. So the other way they have of altering 2D materials is to do physical changes to them. Here, they took a 2D material that is, of course, usually flat and thin, and rolled it into cylindrical shapes. And when they did this, then they were able to improve the signals by 95 times. So a massive improvement in its ability to be able to handle the signal. These are just developments in materials. They haven't been applied to anything yet, but it shows the way in which they're working with 2D materials, trying to sort out their capabilities, and there's exciting stuff coming. So stay tuned.
Any
Richard,
thoughts?
what is a 2D material? What is it made of? And can you touch it?
They're made, you can touch it. The most common one is made out of carbon, and you know, carbon forms a hexagram, and it really is like a bunch of these hexagrams, like a fence built into a thin sheet. And so typically they are sheets, and the most common one are carbon. It turns out many different things you can make in this one atomic layer thick. That's why they call it 2D, because it doesn't have any thickness. It's just one atom thick.
Okay.
So it really has some thickness.
What does D stand for?
Dimension.
Dimension, I see.
Right, 2D. And
No.
there's the one that they made into a tube was, it looks like molybdenum sulfur material. So it's some other material that we don't know about, but it turns out to be very tricky in this 2D stuff. And so different kinds of physical materials have different properties, and they're still discovering what the universe looks like in 2D and really what it can do.
Anybody else? Okay, then on to space. Water exists on the moon, say scientists. Why is that so important?
Well, we want to take a bath, I guess. It turns out that in space, water is a very expensive commodity. To get water into space, the way we know how to do it now is put it on one of these giant rockets and get it out of the atmosphere and then shoot it around. And it costs, I don't know, $1,000 a pound or $1,000 an ounce or some crazy number like that to get it into space. That's why all the guys in the space station, what they use there is water recycling. And so the water you drink today was in somebody's urine yesterday and is just recycled by the system. And so finding what they found now, looking at the moon, looking at the high latitudes on the moon's south pole, they found what they call abundances of water that they can see by the telescopes and know by the reflections of sunlight that it is water. And they say they see it abundantly, and abundantly turns out to be maybe 400 parts per million water. 400 parts per million does not sound very abundant to me, but I just think small, I guess. And what they don't, they're excited because, you know, besides using water to help you live and to grow your plants, water also can be used essentially as fuel in rockets and stuff like this. So there are many uses that are significant, and being able to find sources of it on the moon makes this whole space exploration much easier. There are some questions though, and you know, just because you can see it and know it's water by the reflections of sunlight, you don't know the form of water. One form that it could be is as lunar glass that is created by all these asteroid hits and meteor hits that have happened on the surface of the moon. That would be very hard to extract. It also, though, they could be tiny ice crystals that are just distributed between the grains of lunar sand. That, I think, is going to be relatively easy to get the water out of. They also, one of the other things they don't know that is crucial here is how deep is the water? Is it just on a thin layer on the top, or does it extend into the moon's surface? If it goes deep, then the water there will be, in relative terms, abundant, and we'll be able to depend on it rather than water that we shoot up from the Earth in rockets. So if we can do that, it makes, if the water is enough, it makes space exploration much easier, and it makes living on the moon a lot easier.
Any thoughts?
Richard, what do you mean by 400 parts per million?
400 parts per million says that for every million pieces of dust, there's 400 pieces of water.
Oh, so how are they going to find out just exactly how much water there is then?
They have to go there, and there are astronauts that are human astronauts from the US that are planned to be there in 2024 as part of our next big effort to put people on the moon. And so we will have people there in 2024, and then there's a snazzy probe designed to dig into the surface of the moon in 2025. So to find out how much water is there, like I say, you have to know the depth, and to know the depth, you have to dig into it, and either you do it with people or a robot.
Yeah.
And the moon, Well, in the,
Wouldn't China be also interested in this
Yes.
water?
Absolutely.
And if they get there first, could they stake a claim?
Well, that's hard to claim the whole moon.
Well, the water part.
Well, that's on the north and south poles. Anyway, maybe, when I was a kid, I remember getting deeds for a square inch of the moon in my cereal box. Now maybe it's worth something.
You better stake your claim now.
Well, I just have to find where I put that thing 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 70 years. I don't know.
Richard, I have a question. Where does the moon actually come from? Is it did it used to be a part of the Earth and flew out when everything was being created, so to speak, or it's an asteroid that joined us or something?
I think it from because they think materials on the moon are fairly similar to materials on the Earth. They think it's from the Earth, and they think it could be from some big thing hitting the Earth and knocking a chunk off.
Well, I heard actually that because the moon flew out of the Earth, if you will, separated is maybe a better word to use. But that is actually the hole that it formed is now called the Pacific Ocean. No, it's just a thought.
Any other comments?
Well, if it were part of the Earth, then wouldn't it have many of the same properties of the Earth? And maybe they're more deep down inside the moon than we have found so far?
There's certainly going to be stuff inside the moon, whether it would be water from the Earth, though. The water at the time when the moon formed from the Earth, I don't think the Earth had a lot of surface water. So,
And there are no clouds on the moon either.
nope, no atmosphere on the moon.
No.
There could still be water without it, it's ice.
Yeah. Well, I guess we have to go take a look.
Well, that's what we'll be doing. And again, we'll have the best organized mission to the moon that there's ever been coming up in 2024.
Okay, that's assuming that Trump is not going to be.
Trump is changed the missions of the NASA to put the moon very high on the list. And so he actually raised the priority for the moon and lowered the priority for Mars. So if Trump is there, the mission is going to go on. You might question if Biden is there, will he be a moon guy or not?
Or a Mars guy?
Or a Mars guy, that's right. Will Elon Musk get to him and send him to Mars?
Well, men are from Mars and women are from Venus.
Who's from the moon? Who's from the moon? Nobody. Anyway, so the moon doesn't have much of a political base, I guess.
So if we move along to agriculture and our food system, what's this about regenerative agriculture rather than business that's going to save things?
This thing with regenerative agriculture is something that I really have only become conscious of recently. And it was recently after seeing a Netflix film, Kiss the Ground. I want all of you to write that down. Netflix, Kiss the Ground. It's a documentary with Woody Harrelson, and it's about regenerative agriculture and the efforts that are going on there. The big thing they're talking about in this Kiss the Ground documentary is planting without tilling the soil, and the techniques that they have developed there you can do them without the chemical fertilizers, without spending money to Monsanto, and you do that, and the carbon, instead of going into the air, ends up going into the ground, because plants are great at pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. In this movie, they say that adopting regenerative agriculture across the planet could take, I think they said, half of the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And it's the biggest single thing that can be done in terms of an effort, something that we know how to do now. And anyway, so the article says the global food system needs transforming, and family farmers can get us there because they have centuries of knowledge about sustainable agriculture. And one of the problems with sustainable agriculture now is it had been organized at the UN level, but in the last year, President Donald Trump's ambassador to the UN has unleashed repeated attacks on it, and on the UN talks about it as agroecology is their term for it. They say that agroecology can increase food security, but according to Trump's guys, they think this is just to trick developing countries into rejecting genetically modified crops and synthetic chemical inputs, thereby depriving them of these technologies and keeping them poor. Whereas the truth is, the farmers in places like India are so poor because of the money they have to spend on Monsanto seeds and chemicals that many of the Indian farmers each year commit suicide because they can't pay their bills. And so this is now this kind of issue is a problem for U.S. farmers because U.S. farmers are paying for massive mechanization and industrialization of agriculture that really destroys small farms and destroys the soil. And the massive use of chemical pesticides cause even more problems because they remain in the soil and water for long periods of time. And so agroecology can change some of these factors and build a more diversified and resilient food system. And family farmers now, they say they're clear on this. The family farmers say if we're going to protect our planet and keep healthy food on our table, agroecology is the way forward, because these practices harness, maintain, and enhance the existing biological and ecological processes in agricultural production and capture massive amounts of CO2. So save the planet by saving the soil.
Good. Anyone else?
What kind of expenses involved in switching over, if any?
The biggest expense that I saw in the show was you have to refit your tractors and put what they call a no-till attachment on your tractor. And the no-till attachment, instead of plowing up the field and disturbing the dirt and releasing the carbon from the dirt into the atmosphere, the no-till planter goes through and basically pokes a hole through your existing top plants and plants the seed there and doesn't tear up the rest of the ground. and they use multiple different plants to make a healthy system. And then they also typically couple it with having cows and stuff like that graze on the stubble after you pick the crop. And then after the cows have gone, they bring in their chickens. And so we know that chickens make great fertilizer. And by combining all of these things, the no-till planting with the use of a variety of cover plants and integrating animals into it, make it actually much more productive. The best argument that I heard for in this Kiss the Ground movie was a guy saying currently in America, farmers can plan on an income of a few dollars per acre. And whether they make money or not depends on whether it's, $5 an acre or $7 an acre. The difference between them means the difference between doing okay and being bankrupt. He said typically he's getting $100 an acre income, significantly more than he ever got doing conventional agriculture. And to me, it sounds like it doesn't cost much, and it has an enormous benefit. It just means that people have to change the way they farm, and these farmers, the way they farm is built into their life and habits and schedule in the year and all of these things, so it's a big change.
They demonstrated any of this?
This has been demonstrated, and right now already they have about 5% of the farmland in the U.S. that this is being done on. So it already has gone past the critical startup when, there's only a few people doing it. And what we saw in this movie was a couple of guys who are going around the country speaking as farmers to other farmers, talking about their experiences with it. So there is not only a process that people are doing successfully, but there are people out as evangelists for it now nationally.
Are there other countries that are trying this out?
I don't know about other countries. I do know that this farming in a way to take care of the soil is an issue around the world. Carol, while we were in India, she went to I think, 2-week program on some form of farming that they could do in India that did a better job of being both organic and taking care of the soil. So if they were doing that in the backcountry in India, I think it's gotten around.
They probably weren't using tractors and, technology like that, maybe.
They have the tractors they use there, we wouldn't recognize as tractors. They're smaller things that are run by one person using handles like motorcycle handles behind them. And so they have tractors, but they're much smaller scale.
And they may not be able to be used for this, would they?
I think you need to have the right kind of attachment.
Okay.
So instead of a plow, you have this other kind of planter.
I think that they would have to, if they want to really prove this to be a real viable thing, you will have to talk to these big corporations that are working the lands. I remember once driving through Kansas and seeing, I think, about 6 tractors side by side, with all the equipment that they were pulling in back of them. I mean, it was like a white line. I mean, they would actually plow up, swat something almost half a mile wide.
Yes. When I was in Oklahoma a few years back, it was wheat, late in the wheat growing season, the wheat harvest system, and there were a row of these combines that was, a dozen combines long going over the field. And these guys actually every year they start in Texas and harvest going north until they get to
Yeah, right.
Montana and move north and harvest all the wheat.
Yeah, I know.
So, Richard, what are cyanobacteria and why do they hold so much hope?
Well, cyanobacteria actually are I think, the oldest order of bacteria. They're the ones that were around before there was much oxygen in the air. And these cyanobacteria are also ones that do photosynthesis. Mostly we don't think about bacteria doing photosynthesis. That's just for plants, right? But cyanobacteria can do this. And one of the problems throughout the world is declining availability of good land to farm and dwindling fossil resources. And uh, somebody has decided to do something about it. The German Federal Ministry of Education and Research has just dedicated the science year 2020-2021 to the topic of bioecology with the aim of meeting these challenges of reduced arable land and dwindling resources. And their main strategy is to focus on the cyanobacteria. There are more than 2,000 species of these bacteria, and many of these species have been poorly researched. But what we know already is these cyanobacteria produce valuable organic molecules that have great potential in many different applications. As I say, they're also the kind of bacteria that can pull CO2 out of the air by photosynthesis. And so they also produce unique bioactive agents. And so in the next, this year, they're going to do significant more work in terms of doing genetic sequencing of all of the 2,000 kinds of these cyanobacteria, and then look at what they found using the contemporary methods of synthetic biology and biotechnology to see what they can make from this structure, and then they will figure out how to focus on the production and characterization of all of this stuff. So what they are trying to do is the biggest effort done to date to really catalog the cyanobacteria, do a DNA study of the bacteria, and then use the tools of synthetic biology to see what wonderful stuff these bugs can make for us.
So this is just a lab work right now. It hasn't been.
Yes, it's just lab work now. And this is the kind of beginning of the lab work where they're doing the kind of contemporary cataloging and particularly the DNA sequencing that you're then able to use to figure out what is there and what they can do.
Okay, then moving along, apparently our motivation to learn seems to decline with age. Why does that happen? Richard.
Well, we used to just think it's because get up and go, got up and went. But, excuse me while I fiddle with the computer. Okay. They have what MIT neuroscientists have now identified a brain circuit that is critical in motivation to learn new things or engage in new activities. And this brain circuit is particularly important in learning to make decisions that evaluate the cost and reward that comes with a particular action. And it's funny that making those kind of decisions that have this evaluation of benefits and problems requires a special brain circuit, but it does. And you know what scientists had already seen is that we age, it's harder to have this get up and go attitude towards things. And this engagement is important with our social well-being and for learning. It's tough to learn if you're not attending and engaged. Anyway, that's kind of the background. And what they have found in the study of the brain is they looked in an area that's a part of the basal ganglia, which is a collection of brain centers that deal with habit formation, control of voluntary movement, emotion, and addiction. And in the basal ganglia, they looked at the striatum. And in the striatum, they zeroed in on another smaller structure that is called the striosomes. And these striosomes, they have found out are the particular structure that is responsible for for your ability to have the motivation to take the pain that it takes to learn new things. And they discovered this by doing more kind of mouse studies, because as you know, in a lot of these things, mice are like small people. And what they did was they found in older mice, the ones that are equivalent to about 60 or older, that they found that these mice's engagement to learning went down. And then they found some genetically targeted drugs that boosted the activity in the striosome, and they found these mice became much more engaged in the performance of their task. So they could do something that increased the performance of the striosomes, and the mice became these learning machines. And they did something to depress the striosomes, and the mice became more lethargic and less interested in learning new things. And, you know, there are diseases conditions that they think that are related to these striosomes, and they're not working properly. One is PTSD, where your reaction to a stimuli is way bigger than the reality. The same kind of thing can happen with depressed people and addicted people. And so now, knowing this, they're trying to work on possible drug treatments that can stimulate this circuit, and maybe we can have ways to treat depressives and addicts and PTSD, or maybe we can just have ways to be more actively engaged in trying new things and dealing with the pain of learning.
I'd like to have some of that because I think it would help me learn Spanish, you know? I mean,
That's right.
seriously. That would be very helpful.
Again, I think it would be very helpful also. Now, what they also found out is that stress, prolonged stress, then makes this part of the circuit work more poorly. And so they have known for a while that stress impairs learning ability, and it looks like this is probably how.
Is one of those drugs that is based on this idea?
There's no drugs yet. So they're working on them madly. This would be, they know they could sell a lot of them, a lot of pills.
Well, they're selling Prevagen, you know, to help memory and things of that sort.
Well, they're selling everything they can
There are
figure
some
out to sell.
I assume there are some things one can do to develop patterns. Like with me, getting involved in the Wednesday discussions at LCS means that I'm always having to think through some questions that are arising. And getting involved in this hot science with you means that I'm continually having to try to think through about learning. So I think there are things one can make as part of your patterns of life that would enhance this to some extent.
Now, also, I think that as I read it, I think it also is something that should encourage meditation, because meditation is one of the things that very clearly is a stress reducer. And if stress causes problems in learning, then this is one of the things that deals with it.
I think one of the most interesting things about this is that it's, you know, they've isolated the place, right? And now they see some of the reactions to it. And I don't see any reason in the world why this should be focused on older people. I think that it would be marvelous if it could be extended to younger people.
Right.
Because I would imagine that most of us know people and have known people. I mean, I've known people since I was in grade school that just didn't have any interest in learning anything. And I've never been able to understand why. And I think maybe this could help explain why and correct the situation.
Mm-hmm. And like Fred was saying, you know.
Move on to our last story. What's the link between eating dairy and meat and our risk for cancer?
Now, they have known for some time that there is an association between eating red meat and dairy products and stomach cancer and colorectal cancer. But what they haven't known was what the mechanism was. And so here they clearly identified the mechanism and there is a sugar molecule, NEU5GC, and this sugar molecule is found in tissues of mammals, but not in poultry or fish. And humans develop antibodies to this NEU5GC early in infancy. And it turns out these antibodies are the link between meat and dairy consumption and the cancer rates. They found a significant correlation between high consumption of NEU5GC from red meat and illnesses and the increased development of these antibodies that heighten the risk for cancer. And so here they found the smoking gun and have identified why red meat and dairy, if you have high consumptions of them, you have a high risk for stomach and colon cancer.
Interesting. Any thoughts?
It just seems to me like decades ago, or in the last generation before us and before that, people were eating a lot of meat, like with almost every day.
Right.
And they didn't have the rate of cancer that we do today. So what would make the difference?
I'm not sure if that's true. I just think that we didn't recognize cancers and where they came from.
Possible.
Well, again, they've known about the connection for a long time. I know when I first started reading about health foods in the 60s, which now is the ancient times, already people were saying that there was this connection between stomach cancer and red meat. So they've known it for a long time.
No, I'm thinking about like the 30s and 40s and.
Ah, okay. I don't remember that.
Oh, yeah. You're too young. No, I was thinking about parents and grandparents.
Uh-huh.
Sorry, go ahead.
No.
I didn't.
Anyone else?
I think we're lucky. The way we eat now, the way Carol and I eat is very different than the way we ate many years ago. I suspect that's true with most of you here too.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, we eat mostly chicken, if we eat meat at all, you know. And we happen to have milk in the house now. We've been using soy milk instead.
Uh-huh.
And so red meat, I haven't eaten that in so long I can't remember. So anyway.
Well, I guess if that's it, all the best. Thank you so much, Richard. And now I suppose people can start saying what's going on in the election. Eh?